Sometimes you just got to dive in and do it. And that's where comprehensible input can help, because sometimes people feel like when you're diving into a resource or doing monolingual learning, diving into something that is almost entirely in the language you're learning, I feel like I have to go straight to native content. And you don't. Like, I have tons of people that I have worked with and am working with that watch a lot of children's like movies and cartoons. Like, Disney is translated in so many languages. Whether you are a Disney fan or not, like, that's bare minimum. You could just watch Disney on repeat and then download the songs and listen to Disney on repeat. And you could learn from that because they're talking like real people. They're having conversations with other people, talking about real like experiences, even if it's fantasy, even if there's like talking animals or whatever. Like, it's still grounded in something real, even if it's a little exaggerated or cartoony in a way. Like, you could talk like that and people might just go, oh, that's a little weird, but they're not gonna misunderstand you completely if you sound like Elsa or if you sound like, I don't know, another character. So definitely there are tons of resources that you can try. But I also recognize that some people, whether you're watching this live or in the replay, some people are learning indigenous languages that are not as widely translated. And there are not many resources that are available for this thing. I have helped some people find I love looking for resources. Like, that's my thing. I made a whole section in a guide just on how to find resources. Like, I'm okay with that. So if you need support with that or you're not sure where to start, definitely let me know. But I also just wanted to point out, I kind of talked about it a little bit, the two things to keep in mind when you're using comprehensible input. You want to make sure that the resource is not too easy and too difficult. Because if it's too easy, you're going to be like, oh, I'm great at this. I understand everything. This is nice. And that's a good confidence boost, but it's not comprehensible input. It's not doing the thing that it's supposed to be doing. Save the easy content for something like a progress log or progress report, where you are checking to see how much you know and sort of recording it in like a Notion spread, like database, or in your notebook, or even just recordings on your phone. You're like, this is my log of the progress I'm making in X language. Easy content is great for that because you can be like, I understand all of these things. Look at how amazing that is. But for comprehensible input, you need it to be just above that level. But you also don't want it to be too complicated, because if it is too difficult, you are not going to do it. You are going to have that, video, audio, podcast on, and then you're going to find way too much you don't understand, way too much that you have to look up in a dictionary. And then you're just going to say, you know what? Never mind. This does not work for me. And then you're going to, do something else. It does work, but you have to find the right resource for you. And it takes trial and error. Like, it does. But once you kind of know what you're looking for, whether it's difficulty in vocab and grammar or just topics, it becomes easier over time. Easy stuff is nice for when you're feeling down. Yes, but it's not going to push you. Absolutely. Exactly. Easy stuff is good for when your confidence is low and you just need that boost of like, oh, I'm not as bad as I thought I was. I actually do know what I'm doing, but it is not for this comprehensible input work. Absolutely. And so how do you do this? I actually have a few videos on my TikTok account, and I have a whole blog post on like what comprehensible input is and how to do it. And I think in my blog post, off the top of my head, I think I included some additional links if people want to read up on it, because I didn't invent this. This is not my idea, but it's pretty well known in the language learning community. But basically, you just have to find the resource, and then you have to decide what strategy you're attaching to it. So for example, and I'm actually going to open it up on my phone right now. Let's say, for example, I decide, what's this podcast? Just earlier today, I was listening to the Real Japanese podcast. Yeah, Nihongo no Benkyou Podcast. And essentially, it's entirely in Japanese. She was explaining things like, what was it? Like trains, Tokyo trains. And then there was like her week, some cultural ideas. And so essentially, that's going to be my comprehensible input. And I'm going to listen to it and just say, how much of this do I understand? Do I understand what she's saying? I don't have to understand every individual word because this isn't intensive listening. The goal is, by the end of this podcast, did I understand the topic of Tokyo trains? Yes. Yes, I did. Because she was talking about, the 4 different trains she brought up and, how long it takes. And, the music is different on different lines and in different areas. Like, I understood the gist. Could I tell you which city she was talking about? No, because I wasn't paying that close attention, to be honest. But I could go back and repeat it again a few times as a strategy. And so I have the resource. And then my strategy is, maybe, well, in my case, it was just extensive listening. So I'm just like listening for the sake of listening and immersion. And then I'm moving on. That's my strategy. So you find the resource, podcast, you can do phrase videos, like I said in the beginning of this convo, News in Slow, that series, News in Slow Spanish, News in Slow French, because I have some examples in my database. Let's see, Get Ready With Me's. What else did I write down here? Actually, let me go check what else I wrote down as examples. But yeah, the podcast. And really, my go-to, my first step, I should say, is literally going on Google and just typing in comprehensible input for X language and just seeing what comes up. Sometimes I have to then go listening practice for this language or reading practice for this language, because again, comprehensible input isn't just audio. It's also reading. It's anything you're consuming, anything that is input related. So listening or reading content. So for example, like I have a book right here, which I showed last time on a live and I still have not gotten through it. Yo no soy tu perfecta hija mexicana, which is like, I'm not your perfect Mexican daughter. This to me would be comprehensible input because I can pretty much understand what's going on here. But for a beginner speaker in Spanish, this might be really complicated. This might be too complex and, not comprehensible input. They might have to start off with something a lot simpler. So choose the resource, preview it, give yourself the grace of knowing you might have to switch it. That is okay. You might just put it on a list and say, okay, when I reach X level, when I'm more intermediate, I'm going to come back to it. Because that's also a good way to gauge your skill. So you find that resource. And then, like I said, you decide what strategy. Are you doing intensive listening? So listening really carefully, because then you are going to do things like write down the vocab you don't understand. But with comprehensive input, what I would recommend is rather than looking up those words you don't know in the dictionary, I would write out the definition based on what is being said in the text or the audio. So like, for example, in the podcast I was listening to, she talked about trains. I'm just going to give a simple word. Like if she said like dinsha and I didn't know what that was, I would listen to how she's talking about dinsha. And then I would write down, I guess it's something that like goes from a place to a place and it carries people, because that's kind of how she described it. But I would write that in Japanese. And then I would continue to develop that idea because it's forcing me to listen carefully to see how much I'm understanding. It's forcing me to unpack what's being said versus just listening and moving on. That would be my personal thing that I would try as an example for intensive listening. If I'm doing extensive listening, which is just like listening, immersion, you're not really trying to focus on words you don't know, I would listen to it, check with myself. Hey, how much did I understand, Bront'e? Okay, I kind of didn't understand, or my brain drifted off towards the end. Okay, we're moving on. And I go to the next audio and I'll listen to that one and the next one. And I would do a similar thing for reading practice. So that's kind of the gist of like comprehensible input. Again, one of my favorite strategies, what I love to use for my own language studies. So now I'm checking in with TikTok and YouTube people. How many of you have already used in your language studies comprehensible input? You found, whether you knew the name or not, you're like, oh yeah, I do some monolingual studies, or yeah, I found some resources and I kind of try to understand it without looking up definitions, or I've never tried that before, never even heard of it until you said it, Bront'e, and I'm going to try that at some point. Let me know in the chat while I scroll down in my notes for the next thing we're going to be chatting about. I know the popular one that lots of people were talking or saying that they do, which is shadowing. So you dabbled in it, but like to use it more. Absolutely. And I was thinking, it's just me throwing ideas out, but I would love to have, because I already have a course on the sentence building one, I would love to develop more on these other strategies, because I feel like even when we look them up online and someone's like, oh, yes, go and do some listen and repeat, we still have to identify for ourselves, what does that look like? You know, how much of an audio should I listen? For those of us who have lots of questions and need more examples, we're like, okay, well, what kind of audio is a good listen and repeat audio? How many times should I listen and repeat? What should I do after that? And so I want to help to answer those questions. And also it helps me to sort of solidify in my mind when I'm sharing these strategies with other people. What do I mean when I say that? I usually prefer regular non-language learner focused content, since sometimes the comprehensible stuff can feel can feel a little bit boring, even if it's useful for my studies. Yes, I do find that for honestly some YouTube videos, the podcasts that I find are better, but it also just might be the ones that I look at, because there are some that I found on like Spotify, for example, that also are kind of boring. So I definitely agree. And that's why I say at some point you might switch to like the Get Ready With Me's, or there's another version that I'm not remembering the words for. And then Kara over on TikTok, I try to do this daily, listen to true crime podcasts. Ooh, find a story you'll already know, but in Spanish. Nice. Looking for stuff with a lot of emotion. I love that. So yeah, shadowing practice with music, with phrase, videos, story time. That's what I was looking for. Not Get Ready With Me, although that helps too, but story time videos. So whatever that word is in the language that you're learning, people who are sitting down on YouTube and are like, okay, I got a story for you. Let me tell you about the time when that's a perfect type of content to listen to and be like, did I understand did I understand the tea that they were sharing in this video or not? And it gives you, I mean, especially if that's the kind of things that you listen to, like if these are the ways that you speak with your friends. If it's not, it's just good content anyway, in my opinion. But love this strategy.